For our next puzzle piece, we're going to take advantage of this little candle mesh, and we're going to use it to kind of create a puzzle that you've probably seen multiple times inside of games. So I'm going to use the candle mesh. So what I'm actually going to start with is I'm going to start with our puzzle piece. So I'm going to go to my blueprints, and we're going to start with this idea of our BP puzzle piece. So I'm going to create a new blueprint class. It's going to be a child of our puzzle piece, because we need to use this puzzle piece in order to hook it up to our puzzle manager. And I'm going to give this a name, BP Light Puzzle Piece. All right. So our light puzzle piece, I'm going to want a little candle in there, a little static mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a static mesh to my components. That will allow me to put a little mesh inside of it. I'm also going to add a component that is going to be my box collider. That's going to say this is the area in which I can interact with that object. If I select my static mesh, right, I'm going to be able to choose my mesh from a drop down. I'm going to look for that candle in my list. Here's my box candle. And then I'm going to use that to move my box to kind of like, how close do I need to be to this thing in order to interact with it, right? Like, I have to be inside of this trigger in order to turn this candle on or off, right? In order to activate it. And then the component that I also want to use on this object, right? I've got my candle, I've got my box. I'm also going to add a light. So here's my point light. And I will move that up to where it kind of sits on top of the candle. And now I've got kind of this like, oh, my candle's glowing. It's not really, I'm not gonna use a particle effect. I'm just gonna use that kind of glowing candle. Save, compile, and now I have these access, or these pieces that I can access here that are related to one another. So I've got my light, which is the whole thing. It's everything. I've got a static mesh, which actually is just drawing the little candle. I've got a point light. I'm going to make this a child of my default scene root rather than a child of my static mesh. I've got a light, which is what's just lighting up the top. And I've got a box that represents where you can interact with it. Now I'll go to my event graph, right? Again, I'm not going to access any of these from the parents, so I'm not going to bother using them. I'm going to go into my events, and we're going to activate and set everything up that we're going to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable here that's going to hold all of the different light colors that my little candle might be able to light up. So we're going to do one of those puzzles where when you walk up to it and you activate one of the buttons, you know, the candle changes colors. And then you activate a different button and maybe 3 different candles change colors. You activate another button and maybe 2 candles change colors. And your goal is to have all of those candles lit up the same. That's what we're going to look to build in terms of that kind of puzzle. So I'm going to create another variable list here. It's going to be of type color. So our variable is actually going to be a color, right? I'm going to need to make that an array. So I'm going to right click to make it an array. I'm going to make it visible so that we can see it. And I'm going to give it a name, light colors. I'm going to add another variable here. That's going to be our current color index. It's going to be an integer, not an array, just one single integer. And then I'm going to add another variable that's going to be our target color index. Again, it's an integer, single variable, not an array, and we're going to expose it. So the goal here is that we're going to change the color of that light to match the color of whatever number that integer is set up, right? Then we're going to be able to change that index so that the light changes to a different color. Finally, whenever we go to check to see whether or not our light is the correct color, we're going to be able to then use that to set the variable that says whether or not our light is correct. So to do this, we're going to create a couple of macros. These macros are just going to be shortcuts that are going to enable us to use code over and over again. So one of the things that we need to do, so as we create our macros, we need to define the things that we need to do. And one of the things that we need to do is we're going to need to set our light, right? Set the color of our light based on what our index is. So I'm going to make a macro called set light color from index. It's going to need some parameters. It's going to need an input for where the power comes in, and it's going to need an output for where the power goes when it leaves. So now that I have my inputs and my outputs, I'm going to first check to make sure that you gave me a color number that can actually be used, right? So I'm going to look for the clamp, and we're going to look at clamp integer because we're using integer values. I'm going to look at the current color index that we sent in. You told me this is the value you want it to be. I'm going to check to make sure that it's greater than 0. I need to get my list of colors, and I'm going to grab its length. And we're going to say that length is the maximum value that you could possibly have, is how many are in the array. But we want to do -1 because the first item in the array is going to be a 0. And we want to make sure that we're somewhere between 0 and then 1 less than how many are in there. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to take this length, I'm going to have to subtract, and I'm going to have to subtract 1. And that's our maximum value. So what this is going to do is this is going to give us our color index, what number of the colors that we want to use. Is it color number 0, color number 1, color number 2? But it's going to make sure that that number is somewhere between 0 and the maximum length, however number of colors are in here. So if we have 10 colors, it'll make sure that we use colors 0 through 9, which is 10 different colors. All right, so now that we were able to check to find the number that's within there, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to set our current index to make sure that it's set within that range. So the first thing that we end up doing here is that we make sure that the number that we were given, that color index, is a correct value. If it's not, we're going to make it a correct value. We're going to make sure it fits within that range. This is just error checking to make sure that somebody doesn't send us the wrong value, doesn't send us it doesn't tell us to change to color 20 and there's only 5 colors in the list. That would give us an error. So now that we've made sure that we're within that correct range, what we're going to do is we're going to change our point light. So I can grab my point light component, and I'm going to set my light color. And the new light color that I want is going to be from my array, right? Get my light colors. And we're going to get a copy. That color is going to go into new light color. So here's what this does. It looks at light colors. It gets, right now it's number 0. The number that I want is whatever's in my current color index. It's going to grab that color number. So if this is a 1, it'll grab color number 1. If this is a 27, it'll grab color number 27, right? And we're going to set the light equal to that color that comes out. And then we can go to our output. So there's our macro that sets our light color based on whatever index we currently have set. Want to make sure we test it or we walk through it to make sure it works correctly before we move on. Power comes in. It's going to change our current index. And that index is going to change it to is our same value that we had before, as long as it's between 0 and a maximum, which is our length -1. As long as it's within range, it'll set it to that value. If it's not within range, it'll change it down so that it is within range. Once we're certain that it's within range, we're then going to set the color of our light to whatever number, whatever color matches that current index, and then we'll exit back out. So there's one of our macros, set light from our color index. The next macro that we're going to create is that we're going to check for victory. So this is my check for success. Just like before, we need an input that is our execute so that it runs. We need an output. That runs so that the power goes in, power comes out, right? And we're just going to check if our current index is the same as our target index. If they're the same, I'm just going to set my is success. So we have our input, we have our output. What we're going to do is we're going to check if they're the same. Our current color is the same as our target color. If so, we set our success to true. So all I'm going to be doing is I'm going to set my is success and exit. The value that I'm going to set it to is just going to check, is my current index the same as my target? So check if they're equal. If they are equal, then my success is true. If it's false that they're equal, my success is false. So the value here is the same value that comes out. So now we have a macro that can check for success. Let's go back to our main section in our event graph, and I'm going to make some events. So one event, so custom event, is going to be for my next color. And then let's do previous color. So custom event, previous color. And what are these going to do? How is next color going to work, right? So next color is going to get my current color index, right? I'm going to increase that by 1. There we go. There's my increment. This plus plus means we're going to make this one number larger, and then it's going to come out this side. This side's going to be the one number larger, right? I'm going to check something real quick. So I'm going to do a branch. And I'm going to say, if I made it one larger, let's check the size of our light colors. Here's how big our light color array is, right? If the number that came out of here, right, is greater than or equal to the length of our colors. Move this one out of the way. So here we go. We've got the length of our light colors. If the one that came in, if I increase my color by 1, and so my color was 0, and then it becomes 1, then it becomes 2, then it becomes 3, as soon as it becomes bigger than the number of colors that I have, if that's true, I want to set my value. I want to set my current color back to 0. So if I went beyond, if I went 1 past the number, which is where it's this equals, this greater than or equal to, I'm going to go back to 0. If it's false, if it's not out of range and it's in the right range, well, then I'm good. I've already done everything that I need to do. But what I need to do is I need to do these macros. I'm going to set my color from the index, and both of these are going to do it. So this is just if I get too big, I go back to 0. It loops around. If it's within range, then I set my light color. And then the other thing I need to do is I need to check for success. And we're going to need to do kind of the opposite or the inverse, right? When we go to work on previous color. So if we were to go backwards, right? If we were to reverse them, same type of idea, but we're going to kind of go in reverse. So I'm going to take my current color index, right? And I'm going to decrement it. So here we go. Now it got smaller by 1. So minus minus makes it smaller by 1. Plus plus makes it larger by 1. Then I'm going to do a branch based on what that value is, right? Only now what we're checking for this branch is the new number less than 0? So if I'm subtracting, if I start at 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, when I get less than 0, that's when I have a problem. So if I'm less than 0, then what I want to do, I want to set my current color index if I'm less than 0. But I'm not going to set it to 0. I'm going to set it to this length minus 1. That's the last one on the list. So here's my light colors. I'm going to grab the length. And then remember, the first one on the list is number 0, because this number of our index is how many to skip. So at 0, I'm skipping 0. If I skipped all of them, I would be out of room. I skipped everybody. I want the last one from that list. So I'm going to want this list minus a 1. And that's the value I'm going to set it to. Now, there is a shortcut that Unreal has built for us. Not every engine has this. Not every scripting language has this. It's a very nice tool. This idea that we're doing our length minus 1, we're going to do that a lot. So Unreal helped us out. And there's actually a last index. So if you just want to get the last number, we could always just do last index instead of doing minus 1, right? So length is how many are in there, right? So I could have just done if it's greater than our last index, right? Or greater than or equal to our length. Make sure you know how both logics work, both sets of logic. But this is probably the way that you'll see it the most in Unreal, because this is a really cool tool. This is really nice. You know, as a programmer, I really like this idea that I can just check if it's greater than the last index. But again, not every engine has that. Not every tool has that. It's just one of those awesome things that Unreal decided to put in there because they know that we use it a lot. We're going to use that last index all the time. I could have used it in my set light color from index macro as well. There was a spot in there where I could have used the last index rather than my length minus 1. But that's all that last index is. It's just length minus 1. Same idea. So previous color, right? Subtract 1 from it. Now that I've subtracted 1 from it, we're going to check. Is the new number less than 0, right? If it is, we set it to our last index number. If it's not, we're just going to move on. Like I don't need to do anything else to that number. But I do need, right, to set my light color from index and to check for success. So set my light color, check for success. If it's false, set my light color, check from success. So you'll notice how there's 2 different ones that go in here. You'll do that a lot with your checks when you just need to do one thing only if it's true. Otherwise, we just continue the same way. Awesome. So this gives us an event to move to the next color, an event to move to the previous color. We can call these from triggers. So I can go back and we can create a trigger that's going to call these events. I'm going to make it really simple, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that, you know, our box here, which has our trigger in it as our trigger box, is going to be the one that does it. So now that we have this set up, we're going to be able to do the overlap of that box to allow us to interact with this object. So we're going to use the same type of code that we did for an interactable button that says only if I'm close enough can I press the right button in order to interact with it. So that means on our start, we're going to get player controller 0, And we're going to say player controller 0, you cannot interact with this object. We are disabling input. When I begin overlap, player 0, you can enable input. So target self, enable input when I overlap, disable input when I start, and one more here, event end overlap. And when I end overlapping, we're going to do this same kind of disable the input, right? So I will copy and paste that down here. When you end overlap, we will disable our input, and we're disabling our input again for player 1. So disabling our input for each of these. So in begin play, disabled, begin, enable, exit, disable again. I don't want my tick. I am going to add an event key pressing the E key. You don't have to use E. I just think E is pretty much a standard for interaction. If this object reads the E key, then what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to do next color. And that will move me on to the next color. So now I've got an interactable object that has its own trigger. It has its own box. When I interact, step on top of it, I press E. It'll change me to the next color. And it'll check to see if I have my success. If my success is that way, it'll be set correctly. I'll do my previous color. On begin play, I'm also going to check for success. So I need to make sure that, did my designer set it up where it was successful from the start? So on begin play, we're going to want to set our light color from index and check from success as well. So every time we create this object, we want to put it in the world and do our settings. So there we go. On start, disable the input, check for success, and set our light color. On overlap, we enable input. End overlap, we disable input. If they press E, which means we're looking for it, which means we've overlapped, we're just going to move to the next color. Next color is going to increase the number, set it within range, set our light color, check for success. Previous color we're not using right now, but we could put it on a different key. So I could put like the Q key to go to the previous color. But right now I'm just going to move them between colors as they go. So I can save, I can compile. And now if I bring one of these out into the world, it will have a nice little box on it. I'm going to make sure and set my list of colors. So here's my color array. Let me go ahead and set, let's do like 4, 5 colors, right? So I'm just going to choose some colors here as we go. So I'm making sure that these are all the way bright, and we're choosing different colors. Let's do a nice purple. I don't know, did I do green yet? All right, so there's my colors. My current color is starting on 0. My target color is 0. So when I press play, I should be lit up with color 0. Press E to change colors if I'm in there. So as I'm pressing E, it's changing through the colors. I'm going to just get my little control back here real quick. If I select this object, so let me select my light puzzle piece. My target is 0, right? So with that selected in the world, as I move through them, we'll see that number changing. When it's the right color, when it's color 0, it says success. So if I go back to my Shift F1 to get my mouse again, I can say, oh no, my correct color should be color 3, right? So I press E to go to my next color. It cycles through them. When it's correct, my is success checked, so it lit up, and we go. So now if my object is the right color, and I've turned them the right color, then I've successfully, right, set this puzzle piece to true, which means I can use it in my puzzle manager to make sure that I'm the right color.